Live from Mexico City, this is The Morning Break with Graham Stanley, and you are listening live.
Hello and welcome to The Morning Break. My name, as the introduction said, is Graham Stanley, and my special guests today are Louise Butler, CEO of Burlington English Mexico, and Andy Hockley, Educational Management Trainer, Writer, Consultant and Project Management Specialists. Among other things, we'll be talking about change management, in particular, managing technological change.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org or join in the conversation by downloading the Podbean app and following Teachers Talk Radio, hashtag TT Radio.
Welcome to The Morning Break, everyone. I'm Graham, speaking to you live from Mexico City. On today's show, as I said, I'll be talking to Louise Butler and Andy Hockley about managing technological change. Now, Louise works in educational publishing and is based in Mexico, and Andy is an educational management trainer, writer, and consultant who lives in Romania, in Transylvania to be exact. We'll be talking about change management, specifically handling and leading technological change in education, why it's important, what you can do to prepare for it, whether you're an individual or an organization, or work for an organization rather, what benefits you can expect if you do it well, and what issues it can cause if you ignore it or don't manage it well. Now, at the end of our conversation, we will have a chance. You will have a chance to call in if you're listening live. You can join me live and talk about any of this or something else if you prefer. I'd love to hear from you. And you can join me live in the studio by downloading the Podbean app or going to your browser and going to ttradio.org and clicking on the Listen Live button. Once in the studio, we can chat and I can invite you to be a speaker. And I hope there are some of you out there who are tempted to join me to talk about this or anything else. Now, I'll be talking to Andy and Louise right after the Teacher Talk Radio news.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. Have you checked out their latest releases? Don't miss out! Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading!
This episode of Teachers Talk Radio has been made possible with support from Witherslack Group, the UK's leading provider of SEN education and care. They're here to support you too through an ever-growing offer of free resources, including webinars, podcasts, articles, and events aimed at supporting teaching professionals like you. Visit their website at www.witherslackgroup.co.uk to find out more. This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
TES magazine reported on news that Education Secretary Gillian Keegan said that the proposed schools bill will not progress in this parliamentary session. The bill itself was originally launched in May this year and covered a range of areas including school attendance, safeguarding and new powers over multi-academy trusts. Ms Keegan spoke at the Commons Education Select Committee, confirming that the schools bill will not progress in the third session. She also said her department remained committed to the objectives and would be prioritising some aspects of the bill. Of the aspects of the bill Ms Keegan stated she wanted to focus on, she identified the need for a register to identify and account for children not in schools, as well as helping more faith schools join multi-academy trusts. One area not seen as a priority, however, was the creation of more grammar schools, with Ms Keegan stating her strong views that 93% of children will never get to go to one, and the belief that the academy structure remains the route to make the biggest difference to the most children the quickest. The Mirror Online carries a story about Labour MP Zara Sultana's proposal to widen the free school meal scheme in primary schools across England. Under the plans, all primary pupils would get access to free school meals. The current scheme for universal free school meals ends in Year 2. The article suggests that under the current plan, around 800,000 children living in poverty miss out on free meals due to the strict eligibility criteria. Ms Sultana will bring forward a bill in the coming week. The MP for Coventry South said it was a major issue when families simply can't afford everyday groceries, and that providing meals for school was another strain. She went on to point out that both Scottish and Welsh governments have plans to introduce universal free school meals, but accused the government in England of prioritising tax breaks for the wealthiest people. Warwickshire World online news site reports on the arrival of delegates from around the world to a conference focusing on developing technical education. More than 50 visitors attended the event organised by the British Council at Warwick Trident College. The college is part of the WCG group. Guests arrived from a range of countries in Africa and Asia, with delegations including government ministers and education officials. A spokesperson for the WCG said technical education is one of the key pillars of a successful developing economy, and that the hope was that delegates would take away some insights which will have a positive impact on their country's developments in technical and vocational training. The latest Sunday Times Schools Guide has been released, and many local news outlets are reporting on the successes of schools in their surrounding areas. Northern Ireland outlets report that the guide has rated 7 secondary schools in the national top 50, calling this a significant achievement in light of the nation's comparatively small population. It was acknowledged that several of the Northern Ireland schools mentioned in the list have been described as highly selective grammar schools, with the DUP's Diane Dodds noting that whilst Northern Ireland is punching above its weight, there will always be areas where improvements can be made. She went on to point out that the list as a whole is dominated by expensive fee-paying schools. Finally, Keele University has launched the UK's first law undergraduate degree designed to help tackle the climate crisis. The new course in Law with Environmental Sustainability is the first of its kind in the UK. It has been developed to create legal professionals with a good knowledge of environmental obligations on governments and communities. Professor Alison Brammer, head of the School of Law at Keele, said, "The climate crisis affects everyone, and we need legal professionals who understand the issues we face." This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
So, hello, Linnies and Andy. How are you two?
Good morning. Doing well. Thank you.
Yeah, doing fine, thanks. Good afternoon from here, but anyway, yes.
Oh, yes, of course.
Doing fine.
Good afternoon, not good morning. So, I'd love to start by asking you to let us know more about what you do and how you ended up where you are now. I know you're based in Mexico, Linnies, and I hope the earthquake didn't unsettle you yesterday as much as it did me. And Andy, I think you live in Romania, is that right?
It is, yeah.
So perhaps, Linnies, starting with you, you're CEO of Burlington English, but what does that mean? What do you do?
Indeed. Yes. Well, that's a great question. Thank you, Graham. The earthquake, we did feel it yesterday, but luckily it wasn't terrible, but they're always unsettling, aren't they? So yes, I'm CEO of Burlington English in Mexico. So I have the distinct pleasure to work with Burlington English, the worldwide company, and we're bringing in our digital products here to Mexico. And we are dedicated to creating platform and materials for English language teaching and learning, as well as assessment. And we've decided that in Mexico, we'll bring in materials for higher education and adult learners, as well as some products for young children. For me, it's been a great adventure. I've been with Burlington for the last year and a couple of months. It's been a great adventure to work with Burlington. It's an excellent company. I love the quality of the products. but it's been an interesting turn in my experience, in my professional experience. I've moved into this role from working with very large universities and other school settings. And so it's been very exciting for me to bring in my background and experience into what I'm doing today, and to be able to support schools and education in Mexico in a different way. I mean, I could go down to the nitty gritty of the day to day, but we get to do a little bit of everything. And the best part is to work with leaders in different schools and talk to them about how we can best support their English language teaching needs. And that's the part I really enjoy the most.
Thanks, Louise. And Andy, you're freelance. You've been freelance for some time, is that right? And you're flying around the world.
Well, I used to fly around the world until COVID.
Of course.
Now I don't go anywhere. So I live in this small village in the mountains in Transylvania, which is a real place. Sometimes people tell me, you don't really live in Transylvania, do you? And I'm like, yes, it really exists. I do live here. And, I used to have this very balanced thing where I would spend 9 months of the year in my little quiet village and then jet around the world. And now I'm just spend 12 months of the year in my quiet village in Transylvania as a freelance educational management trainer, consultant, basically.
I've seen the pictures of where you live in the forest and stuff, and it looks idyllic. I can imagine it's quite something to live in that part of the world, actually.
It's gorgeous, yeah. And I could just walk out the door and be in the mountain, like walk in the mountains.
Beautiful.
5-minute walk, and I'm in the forest and in the mountains. I have to be a little bit careful of bears, but apart from that, we're all right.
Bears, not vampires, then?
No vampires, no. Well, not
that you've noticed.
I know about.
So, given the geographical differences, how did you both end up writing a book together? And what was it about technological change that interested you?
Shall I start, Louise?
Sure.
I'm not sure. I'm not entirely sure if I remember. Lenise and I have only met in person once, I think, in Mexico. In fact, I came over to do something in Mexico, UVM in Cuernavaca. I want to say about 4 years ago, but I'm never sure about these things. I say things like about 4 years ago, and then I find out it was 10.
It was about 4 years ago. Yep.
And so we had met, but then when CUP approached me about the book and about I'm actually the series editor of the books. Yeah. They said, oh, well, we really want to do a book about this subject, leading technological change. And have you heard of? Do you know Lenise Butler? And I said, oh yeah, I have met Lenise Butler. And they said, well, because Lenise we'd also like Lenise to be involved. So that's how I understood that. It may well be that Lenise has a different story. I have no idea.
Well, so it was about 4 years ago. I knew of Andy because I was working in the university and requested some materials from Cambridge, and they brought us Andy's book, From Teacher to Manager, and myself and my coordinators, we went crazy for it. We loved it. It was so helpful in the organization. And so Cambridge said to me, why don't we bring him in to do some training for you? So of course I met Andy with stars in my eyes and found out he was an amazing guy, and not just on paper. And then I was approached also by Cambridge, who said, we've got this title we'd like to have written, and we are going to work with Andy Hockley. Would you be interested? And I at first said, of course not. I don't think I can do that. I've never written a book, and it's Andy Hockley. How am I going to write a book with Andy Hockley? And Karen said, please, Lenny, just talk to him. So we had a conversation and we seemed to hit it off, and that's how it all started. I said, well, why not? Well, I should try. And so it was a great experience for me, but that's how it came together for me.
Fantastic. I think change management is such an important aspect about academic management or school or language school organization, etc. management. Change management, especially in the context of education, is such it's a crucial thing, isn't it? What are the main things that educational organizations need to keep in mind, just in general, about change management if they want to make a major change to the way they work?
Did you want to start, Andy?
Okay. Well, obviously, you have to be aware, any organization, not just an educational organization, has to be aware that they need to be ready to change, because if you stay where you are, you get left behind. And obviously in education, you're dealing with various changes in our understanding of the way students learn. Obviously, in this case, technological changes, methodological changes, and different other changes. And of course, sometimes there's urgent change, just like happened when the pandemic began 2 years ago, and suddenly we all had to go online, which was obviously, it certainly wasn't a planned change for most people. It was very much an emergency change in that regard. But I think, change is incredibly part of life, that we can't avoid. So I think, that the first thing you have to be aware of is how can we make our organization sort of flexible, because we don't necessarily know yet what the next change is going to be, but we have to be ready that it may happen soon, or we may decide that we need to change things, or we need to move on, we need to do things in a different way, offer new products, whatever. So that would be the kind of the sort of the starting point, if you like. That would be, for me, that's the starting point of where all this starts from. It's having this culture of organizational culture, which everyone is like maybe aware and alert to what's going on out there, what's happening in the world, and what might be interesting, or what is it that our students need, or how is it that our students are learning, or how do they need help in a different way? Is there something that they're really struggling with that we don't have the resources to help them with?
Yeah, very good point. Anything to add, Lenise?
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think I've worked in education for my entire professional career, and I've been in different roles. I mean, I've been an aide, I've been a teacher, I've been a coordinator, I've been a director, I've been a manager, I've been a leader, I've been a substitute, I've been all over the board. And I think one thing that happens is there's a lot of, and this goes very hand in hand with what Andy just said, there's a lot of fear around the idea of changing something, because we don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to disrupt whatever seems to be working well enough in the organization. And I think, it would be so much easier if we were able to have open conversations and come to the understanding that everything probably won't be perfect at first. It's going to take some work, and we can expect some disappointments along the way, but change is a necessity. And if we're not afraid to try things out and to be able to have an open dialogue around, what it means, and when complications come up, we're still going to work together to make it happen, I think things would be so much better. Because in language teaching organizations and schools and universities, we are so connected to what the parents might think and how it will affect tuition, et cetera, that sometimes we're not really open to change. And every change involves complications, ups and downs, right? And so making awareness of that from the beginning, I think is really important, so that also that the people who are involved in change aren't afraid of their participation. So I think that's what I would add.
Yes, very, very good points. Turning to technological change in particular, I think everyone who has ever used a computer or a mobile phone understands that technology needs to be updated frequently. Otherwise, there's a risk of data loss, of wasting your time, or generating a lot of frustration with tools that don't work, or don't do what they want them to do. So that happens to us all. And speaking as someone who's just replaced his computer for a new one, the usual reaction when you do so is why didn't I do that earlier? Why did I spend so much time struggling on with that old machine? Basically, a lot of the time it's to do with you don't want to spend the money, but or the reluctance to change, as you said, Lenise. But are there any accepted guidelines, you think, when it comes to a larger scale, either on a project or an organization, of when you should adopt technological change, either replacing technology or looking to do something new? does it depend very much on the context, really?
Yeah, well, if it's okay for me to start. So one of the things that we actually talk about in the book is a framework for how to evaluate where your organization is at in regards to change and technology, and when and how it should be integrated. And there's some great tools and checklists and things in the book that could help with this question. But I would start by saying, I think for some reason, we tend to set technology apart from other elements in the learning environment, and there's a risk in doing that. And I would say, and I think that Andy and I come back to this quite frequently in the book, is that the change of technology and the way we use technology in the classroom and in our processes, the educational process, needs to be connected to the need. And if that technology actually fulfills a real need. No, sometimes there's it's a reality that organizations, technology can often check boxes. So, do you have an appropriate LMS? Check. Does that mean it's being used correctly in the classroom? Well, that's what we really need to look at, right? And when do we know it's time to make that change? When you evaluate what you're doing and the current technology or the current lack of technology, and make the decision on, can a new piece of technology, a new software, a new element, can you bring it in? Will that help you fulfill that need? And it's tough, it's tricky, because technology brings in so many bells and whistles. And we also have this idea that we have the new generations are, technology first. They do everything online, which I would argue they might do everything online, but that doesn't mean they know how to learn online. And that's our role as a language teaching organization, is to use technology in an appropriate manner so that the learning is facilitated and in fact augmented or improved through technology, and not just because it looks pretty and not just because it checks the boxes.
Yes. Anything to add, Andy?
No, I mean, that's largely, I mean, I agree entirely with what Nate just said. I mean, on some level, I think there's a slight difference between technology replacement and technological change. So, obviously when technology starts to wear out, let's say, or slows down, or, needs, like possibly happened with your computer, you are actually replacing one piece of hardware with another piece of hardware often, which may be faster and better. And actually, once you've got the new hardware, you might think, I can do things that I didn't know I could do before because I've got this new hardware. So there's that kind of technological replacement, but there's also this obviously technological change, which is, can we do something new? And I think we say, and as Lenise just said, that it really should come from need, and it should be largely driven by let's call them the end users of the technology. So in a classroom setting, that would be the teachers and the students maybe as well, who, how is the technology going to be, how can we use the technology to achieve something that we really need to achieve in the sense of the teaching learning environment. Obviously, within an education organization, there are other technological needs outside the classroom as well. There's, school management software, registration software, et cetera. So I think that is sort of like the ideal, and that's what we talk about a lot in the book, about how we can create the conditions there that teachers drive a lot of this change. But I mean, the reality is also, and we also mentioned this, is that sometimes it doesn't come from teachers. Sometimes it comes from on high. Someone says, okay, you're going to have this technology, whether or not it works, or whether or not it's useful for your school. And that you have to adapt to that and make that work as best you can, because sometimes maybe the marketing department will tell you, okay, we need this technology because the school down the road has the same technology and they're ahead of us because that's what they're using. Or, you've got upper management. If you're a university, for example, the upper management says, well, we're going to do this. And you might be thinking, well, it doesn't really apply to us. Well, live with it because you've got it. So, there's different forms of change, and change comes from different places. And in an ideal world, it would come from the end users, but often it doesn't just come from those people. So those are some of the kind of considerations about this technological change that's happened or does happen.
Yeah, that difference between a kind of bottom-up change to a top-down change is quite important, isn't it? I always remember reading about this Ethiopian scenario where there was transmission teaching. So the idea of having plasma screens in public schools in Ethiopia to be able to beam in teachers because there weren't enough qualified teachers in their schools. And so that decision was made, as I understand, from the Ministry of Education, and it was rolled out across the country. And then all of these plasma screens turned up at schools that didn't even have electricity or running water. I think it's having that knowledge of exactly what the context is and what's possible, and keeping on top of technology as well is so difficult, isn't it? Like just knowing what is there to be able to decide, as you say, Andy, what kind of technological change that needs to happen. Maybe. I mean, do both of you keep up to date with things that are happening in the world of technology, and what do you think is going to be the big factor coming down the line, do you think?
That's a great question.
That's
a great question.
I asked it because I asked it because I don't know, and I would like to know.
Yeah. So I actually just did a session a couple of weeks ago, and people asked me, well, what are like the best technologies that you can recommend for the classroom? Now, this was in an entirely different context. I wasn't talking about our book or anything related. And to be fair, I'm not an expert in technology. And my focus on technology has always been if it supports the learning need, then that's what we'll do. And so I would say I try to keep abreast of what's happening with technology and what users are finding useful and how teachers are implementing in the classroom. But I would never claim myself to be an expert or to know. It seems like there's something new every single day, right? And when I talk with institutions, I generally like to hear from the teachers. Because I've always said, and this applies to any kind of technology or books or anything, if it's not being implemented well, it doesn't really matter how great it is if it's not doing what it's supposed to do, because we're not doing it the right way. So in answer to your question, I mean, what are the trends? I can speak from what I know here in Mexico and what I've seen. And what I see here, people are looking for more technology that will support learning in the classroom. We're still living in a space today where schools are determining if they're going to go back to face-to-face 100%. Some of them already are. English language teaching and learning is in a unique situation in Mexico because often, especially in higher education, its placement within the university or within the organization is very transversal. And so you have students of all different focuses trying to take class all together. And that lends itself more to the online environment than perhaps some of the other topics or other learning courses and things like that. And so, what I see here is really the need is in how do I keep students engaged with the language in an online environment? And that's where I see people are really searching for tools that will help. And as well as language support that can be done online. Because if I'm not physically able to anymore sit down with you face to face and show you, how I should pronounce or explain, clearly how the differences in language might work, you can do those things online, but you've got probably a larger group. They're all coming in from different places. They're not all necessarily signing in at the same time. And so having technology that will support that, I think, is important. I hear a lot more talk now than I ever did about different apps that might be used and how the LMS, the different elements of the LMS can be integrated into the classroom. So I'm not sure that answers your question directly, but from where I'm sitting, that's where I see a lot of focus. And myself, as not a technology expert, I've always focused on use rather than knowing the 853,000 different new pieces of technology that are coming out every week. But that's what I can say.
Yeah. I think from my perspective, I have a feeling that we're in a sort of we're still in this. I won't call it post-pandemic because I hope it's post-pandemic, but I'm not entirely convinced it is post yet. Where it's technology was being introduced into language teaching, and all these different things were coming, and things were changing rapidly and developing rapidly. And then we hit March to 2020, and suddenly we all had to do things in a different way. And then I think there was a kind of a period, maybe well, there was a month or 2 or 3 period where people were just floundering around trying to get anything done. And then people started, how can we make this work? So a lot of the stuff that was being developed in a very fast way related to people learning at home, let's say, and teaching at home, because of course that's what we were all doing. And I heard of there were quite a few projects to do with virtual reality and so on, which were kind of being developed in that time period. And I think now we're not quite sure what education is going to look like. We're still not quite sure what education is going to look like. And, there's some people doing everyone's back in the classroom. There's some places where there's a hybrid system. There's some places where they're still not back in the classroom. They're still online. And so things are sort of a bit amorphous at the moment. People keep talking about AI and, and how that's going to affect language teaching. I don't know if and when it will. I don't think it really has done yet, but I'm not sure how that's going to happen. And of course, we've got technology which is potentially rendering. I don't want to kind of be negative, but it's potentially rendering English teaching redundant, because we've got technology which does translation for people and instant translation, and people can talk into their phone and it comes out in another language. And so there are technological changes, some of which may be quite difficult for our profession to cope with in the future, and others which which may not be. But at this stage, I think, because of the sort of this kind of what I would call this towards the end of the pandemic period, it's not that clear where things are going. And I think, as Denise said, I think it's really important that we teachers, we in education, drive the conversation rather than technical experts, because we know what we would like to be able to achieve in the classroom. And it's if we're driving the conversation and saying, can we do this? And I can work with somebody who knows how to do that, so an expert, an engineer or a software engineer or whatever. If we can have those conversations where educators are driving this, can we do this? Can we do this? Can we do this? And having those kind of long, involved conversations with the technicians, I think we'll have something better than. I think to an extent in the past we've had a lot of things driven by the experts, the people who can write software or who can do these things, and they're like, okay, we can do this, and they put it together, and then teachers are like, okay, it's all right, it's got some things that work quite well and I quite like it, but some of it I wish it did this as well, and I wish it did that, but it doesn't really do everything I want it to. And and there is that kind of that danger that we allow ourselves to be told by people, oh, this is what we can do, rather than say, can we do this? And I think if we can do it that way, the technology will develop in a way which is more educationally valuable, I think.
Yeah, I think that's so important, isn't it? I think I've got friends here who are from abroad, and they're interested in learning Spanish, for example, and a lot of them are starting to sort of look at ways in which to do that. And I'm always telling them, get a teacher, it'll save you time in the long run. You learn better Spanish if you get a teacher. You'll save yourself some time. You'll someone who knows how to teach will really, you'll get a much better experience. You'll have more fun as well than trying to struggle with, some of these apps. By all means, you use an app to supplement it, and just go and try to talk to people in supermarkets. But you really will benefit if you get a teacher, join a class. And it's quite surprising to me sometimes just how that seems to be kind of a revolutionary idea these days for a lot of people. It's quite shocking, really. It's a bit worrying, as someone who works in language education as well, that is the case. So
I think
we've sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's actually one of the inherent sort of threats when we're looking at technology. I don't know if threat is the right word, but concerns, right? And we often hear from the teacher, well, this is going to replace what I'm doing. I don't think technology does or should replace a teacher or, a mentor in the language learning process. First of all, I don't think technology is at that place yet. But second of all, I don't think we live in a world where we don't interact with people. And so, you should be doing that when you're learning the language as well. But it's really tempting, isn't it? Because you can get an app and you can do it from your home in your own spare time, and you're not tied to a schedule. And I think what I see, and especially in the younger learners now, well, like high school and up, is that they're much more comfortable. They talk to their friends over technology. It's different. They're not used to getting together face to face necessarily, and it's great to have support to do that. But ultimately, I think language learning needs to be done with the support of a teacher in order to be done correctly, and for students to actually learn in a way which makes functional language. So,
yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
And so, what about other educational projects that you're both interested in? Is there anything that you're involved in that is exciting to you educational wise at the moment?
Well, most of my work is related to management, as you know. I mean, it's ELT management is my area, and I've been involved for 20 years now with this course called the International Diploma in Language Teaching Management, which had been going for 20 years, and it has a face-to-face and an online component. And we've just relaunched that in an online only because of COVID. Everything is because of COVID. So it's now an online thing. We're doing the first course at the moment, and that's going very, very well. So that's what I'm mostly focused on at the moment, as well as I'm writing articles and so on, and also doing some training on an MA for NILE in the UK. But that's really what I'm focusing at the moment, is basically this new online version of this course that we've been doing for 20 years, and we've sort of rewritten things, and we're delivering it in ways which are different from how we used to be delivering it. So that's it's both exciting and hard work, and because you have to kind of you take all of these things I've been doing and now change the way I do it. But it's the feedback we've had so far from the first cohort of students is very positive. So it's going well.
Great. What about you, Linese?
Well, I mean, the role that I'm in puts me in a unique situation to talk to different types of institutions and sort of explore with them and discover how precisely how technology can support in their learning process. So seeing some of those big questions in action for me is really exciting. I also just finished a big project. It was my dissertation, actually, about the integration of culture into language learning programs. And I've been interested in that for some time. And I think it's not a discussion that's been so prevalent as of late, but I think it's a very interesting conversation, especially now in this sort of pandemic world we're living in, where everything has been moved online, and what that means for learners and how they can be grouped with students from different countries and different backgrounds, and how we might sort of capitalize on that in this environment. That for me is very interesting as well. So they're both such big things that we're exploring, but I think that's really where I've been. I feel very blessed because they're things that I'm very interested in, and I'm in a situation to explore both of them. So that's where I've been thinking a lot these days.
Great, that's really interesting, and we touched upon this earlier, but this idea of there having been a real sea change when it, obviously during the pandemic, it suddenly wasn't necessary to try and persuade people that online learning was important, because it was like online learning or no learning. So I think you mentioned it a little bit, Andy, about how things really changed and things haven't gone back to what they were before. Do you think that now is a permanent change? Do you think that's something that organizations, people because they got used to it, will continue just doing, and they'll demand that from educational organizations to be able to study or to be able to teach online. I've certainly seen that in my work with teachers, for example, getting used to teaching online from home and thinking, can I just do this? I don't know if you've seen that.
To an extent, I have seen that, and I think it seems to be quite some. I mean, from the teacher perspective, at least, it seems to be something which is quite dependent on the personality of the teacher. So I know a lot of teachers who are like, "Oh, thank God I can go back in the classroom, because that's where I feel at home. That's where I feel comfortable. That's where I feel my skills are best used." And other teachers who are, well, I quite enjoy this idea of, not commuting and not going into an office and not work, and I've actually worked out how to make it work online in that kind of way. So from a teacher perspective, I certainly think there's a bit of a split there between what teachers like to do and what they want to do. I'd speak from the perspective of someone who prefers to be in a classroom, to be honest. And then from a student perspective, I think probably there's a similar split, that some students do prefer to be in the classroom. But I think, I work in, let's say, teacher development or manager development, and in terms of cost for people, it's so much cheaper to not travel somewhere and stay somewhere and pay for a tutor to come to where you are and to be able to do it online. So I think in that respect, things have changed quite dramatically. And I also think, I think what the pandemic has done is made everyone in our industry realize, yeah, we can do it online. Whereas in the past, it were maybe people like you, Graham, who knew we can do it online because you were working on it. But there were people like me who were thinking, yeah, maybe in the future that might be possible, but maybe I'll be retired by then, so I don't have to worry about it. So, but now it feels like, yeah, okay, we can do things online. It is much more possible than many of us thought was the case.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think that's the big change for me. It's the realization from everybody that we can do this. It's possible, at least within contexts where the technology can support it. I mean, obviously, places where they don't have Wi-Fi access or whatever, it's a very different story. But in the context that I work in, mostly, I think people have realized it's possible. What
about your context learning? Have you seen that happening?
Yeah, I agree first that the whole question around resistance to the use of technology and doing online learning, of course, changed dramatically. And it wasn't a choice, right? But something we thought would take 30 years happened overnight. And there is a real sense of accomplishment, I think, and positive, around a positive feeling around, well, we did it, we made it work, right? There's areas of opportunity, obviously. And I think that prevails in some regard, that now we know we can do it, like Andy said. On the other hand, I do think it depends a bit on context and expectations. So, obviously, setting aside situations where technology is not easily implemented because there isn't infrastructure for it, which is an entirely different discussion and a fascinating one, but it's still entirely different. What I have seen is that it does depend a bit on context. And I can say this as the parent of 2 young kids. Those elementary kids need to go back to school, and we want them there all day, right? They need it for their development and their learning, and doing online learning with kids that are very young is very, very difficult. And fascinating because they do understand the use of technology, but very, very difficult. And sort of the learning, the socialization and learning that was missed during the pandemic is something that's very important. And then if you move up in the age group, you've got young kids who, I don't want to take a negative turn to this, but they suffered a lot during the pandemic of not being able to see their friends, of not being able to leave the house. You're talking about teenagers who the last people they want to be with are their parents, and they're stuck with their parents for 2.5 years. Going back to school, I think, has been a challenge, but a welcomed one for high school, middle school settings. And then when you get to adult learning and young adult learning, I think that's where the question gets perhaps a bit more interesting, in the regard that everyone has an opinion, and you can't just tell an adult, well, this is how we're going to do it, and they don't have their own opinion around that, right? And so people, what I found, are looking for different options. It's very interesting because we've been participating in some projects for hybrid or online 100% learning, and we think we're going to get just scores of students signing up, and that might be the case, but then if we look at their production, there's still obviously something that we need to work on, because they lose motivation, or the technology might not be as easy for them as we thought. And so there's still, I think, a need for the face-to-face. And I think that's something we're still discovering, and each organization will have to ultimately make a decision. I think there perhaps is a niche for all of those options, right? For people that are good at 100% online learning. But I feel like the tendency has been more to go back to at least a hybrid situation where we have contact with a person, and even if we do choose 100% online, there's still an expectation that we'll have a tutor, a mentor, or a session that we can potentially sign up and attend. I don't know that answers your question, because much like Andy, I'm not sure we know the answer yet. But I think that these are what I've seen in this context in Mexico, right?
Yeah, it's such an interesting time, isn't it? I think, particularly if for what you've just said about technological change, really, I think we're in a period of high technological change, and things are starting to sort of, well, not settle, but I think there are lots of things that are still being sort of decided now. I definitely agree with you. I think it's so important. The face-to-face is so important. Even as an advocate for technology, and someone who spent years sort of really embracing it and finding personally and professionally a lot in technology to sort of promote. I think I'm so much a fan of the face-to-face and actually physically being in the same places as other people. I just find it quite interesting to have the choice, really, if you can. That's how I see it.
Agreed.
Right. I think I'm going to wrap up now, because we're kind of running out of the time available. I apologize for keeping you waiting as well at the beginning of the conversation. Any final words about the subject, or anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Well, I would say thank you for the forum and the space to discuss what we've been working on. And it's certainly something near and dear to our hearts. It was an amazing process for me. It was a lot of fun to work with Andy and really lean on his expertise for things. So for me, it was such a great experience. I hope people will read what we've published and enjoy it. So overall, I mean, I think thank you for this space, and just, we're all kind of in this together, and look for the tools that work for you. And I think that our book provides just that, right? The users, the people that are in the language teaching organizations that might need support in making decisions around technologies. There's lots of tools and tips that we can share there. So thank you for the space, Graham. That's what I would say.
A pleasure.
Yeah, I echo what Lenise said. Yes, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Graham. It was great to talk. And yeah, I mean, there's many more things we could talk about, but there's only a limited time. So, I mean, really, I think that I think hopefully that's given a little bit of a sense or a taste of what the book's about. It's sort of about change, but it's also about technology. Basically, it's the two things melded together, and how you can manage that change, and how you can encourage that change, because I think it should be about encourage as well. And cope with change. So
definitely. Well, thank you both for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you both about this subject and other things. And I wish you all the best with your book and future ventures.
Thanks you
very much.
So I very much enjoyed talking to Lenise and Andy about that. If you're listening in live and would like to join me now, I'd love to hear from you. You can download the Podbean app or use your browser, go to tcradio.org, and then click on Listen Live, and you can join me in the studio. And then I can bring you in as a speaker, and we can talk about your experience of the subject or anything else that's on your mind. For those of you already in the studio, I would love to encourage you to join me now. Please let me know if you would like to speak, and I can take it from there. Otherwise, well, as you might have noticed, change management is something that I'm interested in. I've become interested in it more and more. And if any of you have been through an important change process, I'm sure it interests you too, especially if you've had a role in managing the change. Now, if you've had to do that, then you know how important it is to understand the impact of managing what is called limiting beliefs about change and handling any resistance to change, which is one of the most important reasons why a major change may fail. And I'll speak a little bit more about limiting beliefs in a moment. Even if you don't work in management, I think as a teacher, you may have to help manage expectations with learners or parents about changes that are happening in your school, or at a stretch, even something that you implement in your classroom. You can learn quite a lot from change management from that, I think. Now, some common concerns if you are a part of a major change process are, for instance, information. People involved in the change need to be kept well informed. They will respond best. People respond best if they know what you know about the change. If they understand what you understand, I think if everything is transparent and they understand the reasons for making the change, I think that's a very important thing. Next, I think you need to make them understand how it affects them personally. So everybody wants to know what's in for them. How will their life be better? I think they need to be helped. People need to be helped to understand the picture of what things will be like once the change has taken place. And then the implementation, of course, the concerns about implementation. During the change process, where can they go for help if they need it? And then impact, of course, as well. What difference will the change make on people's lives, on teachers' lives and learners' lives? It should definitely have an impact on the way they work, how the school functions, for example, or else why implement the change? Then there's collaboration aspects, how to get everyone who is affected with the change involved. And then finally, once the change process has been started, of course, it's how to refine the change and improve things, because it's very unlikely that things will happen exactly as planned, because life isn't like that, is it? So I mentioned this idea before of limiting beliefs. And these are thoughts that you think are true, but which limit you in some way. They cause you not to fully realize what you want to, for example. Now, this might be about you, it might be about your interactions with other people or the world. And limiting beliefs about you, for example, could include your skills, your knowledge, your experience, or behaviors. If you hold limiting beliefs related to your interactions, that might be something about the way you are with colleagues, friends, and family, or other people in general that limit you in some way. And then limiting the beliefs about the world could include views you hold about work or society and how things work. And limiting beliefs are important when it comes to change management, because it can affect the way that it can affect the way the change, if the change is successful or not, and the way that the change is implemented, for example. Considering what limiting beliefs people hold about a change is important, how do you determine the limiting beliefs others may hold about the change and what's being implemented? Well, you should consider, I think, carefully to the language that people are using when talking about change and how it might affect them, how it might impact the school or the bigger picture. Really try to understand what people are saying and what are you saying as well. What language are you using when it comes to the change? Are you using the language that is actually helping people overcome potential resistance to it? Or are they believing what you have to say? Are you able to provide evidence that will help people understand what the change will be like? Are you being honest about the impact of the change as well? How close to reality is it? And how might you overcome any beliefs someone may have that could be limiting? that might not be grounded in reality. So, have you been through an important change at your school or organization where you work? If you have, then I would love to hear from you. As I said before, if you're listening live, why don't you join me to talk about it? Please call in. And we can speak about that or anything else as well. If you're listening back to the recording and think this is something you would like to talk about, then please get in touch. I'd love to have you on the show to talk. If this is something that you know something about, or really if there's any other subject that you would like to talk about with me, then I would love to invite you to get in touch, and we can arrange for you to come on the show, and we can speak about teaching, about education, about schools, about anything you think that may be of interest to our listeners, teachers out there. So, whatever the change scenario that you're implementing or involved in, if you are involved in a change scenario, and at some point in our lives, in our professional lives, we definitely all are. Another important factor is understanding what's called key external drivers. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, anything not directly involved in the change process, for example, but which may affect it. You need to know what these drivers are and reflect on how they may impact on the change that you are implementing, or that is being implemented. So what might be those external drivers, and how would they affect people or the change that you are going through? Well, they could be anything from the organizational culture to the structure or practices or systems in place at your school. Other things that might affect the success of the change process are things such as motivation of the people involved. How do people feel about what is being changed? Will people embrace the change or be resistant to it? And are you changing something that people like and are used to? You may have decided to change something that doesn't work well, but which people have a very strong emotional attachment to it. And that, even though you know that the change will be positive in the long run, in the short term, it could result in a very different reaction than if you're making a change to something that doesn't work well, which people aren't particularly attached to emotionally. I'll give you an example. I always remember when I was living in London, when London Transport decided to change from using the Routemaster bus to a more efficient, modern type of double-decker bus. Now, the Routemaster, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you will have seen it, I'm sure. It's that classic red London bus that was, and for many people still is, such a symbol of the city. It's a bus that doesn't have a door at the back. It just has a platform that you can step on with a pole to grab hold of. And this meant you can run for the bus, jump onto the platform as the bus is moving. So you aren't limited to getting on and off the bus at a bus stop. You can run for the bus as it's moving down the street and jump on and then pay the conductor, for example. I loved it, but I do recognise that it was probably very dangerous to do that and probably caused lots of accidents. And because there was no door at the back, it was also difficult, I'm sure, to heat during winter. So London Transport, of course, started to replace them. I can't remember exactly when this was, but that was some years ago, to phase out the Routemaster. There was a massive negative wave of emotion. People didn't like the idea of changing these buses. Even people who perhaps weren't recognized, well, they recognized that they probably did need to change for various reasons that I mentioned before, but they reacted against it, and so much so London Transport had to keep them much longer than they thought they had to. This is an example, I think, of an external driver that I imagine wasn't taken into account when the change was designed. And the same is true, for example, of red telephone boxes in the UK. Back in that time before the proliferation of mobile phones, and when telephone boxes were everywhere, when people depended upon having access to a telephone box in the street to be able to call people, Now, I remember a change that was designed to replace those emblematic red telephone boxes to more modern, more efficient metal and glass ones that weren't as attractive. I have to say, and there was a very negative reaction to that. And that's an example of London. It wasn't London Transport. It was the Post Office. Was the Post Office? No, British Telecom. I think not recognising or not taking into account the emotional attachment to the way the telephone boxes looked, how much of an important symbol they were to people, for example. And so this is very important. Both of those changes I mentioned, the Route Master Bus and the red telephone boxes, for example, they're examples of massive technological change programs that have important challenges as far as external drivers are concerned. And no, I'm not talking about the bus drivers here, but about how people felt about the existing technology from an individual point of view too. Now, you may be using a particular computer, for example, that you're used to, in which you're reluctant to change because you're used to it and you don't want to change, even though you know that what you're using, the software, the hardware, for example, is out of date and isn't working as well as it should be, etc. Now, if you amplify that to a school, you may have a number of teachers who really don't want to change the software and computer in the staff room, or a learning management system, an LMS, because they're used to it. Or even worse, when it comes to learning platforms, the teachers aren't interested in changing because all of their resources that they've produced are on there, and maybe these resources are platform specific, and changing the platform would mean a lot of work to create again or recreate those resources or start from scratch, etc. Or even just moving them to the other platform might be problematic. Quite often, it's that feeling of being locked into a software that causes us to be reluctant or very anti a technological change. I could go on. It's obviously, I'm sure you've noticed, it's obviously something that I'm quite interested in. But we've run out of time, so I'm going to stop there. And so that brings us to the end of today's morning break. Many thanks to today's special guests, Linese and Andy, for joining me. And all of you who joined us live, whether you're listening in the studio or just listening in any way, hello to all of you listening back to the recording too. And remember, there are Teachers Talk radio shows all week. And you can join me again, I hope, next time at the same time. But until then, bye for now.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.